They lied to you. Every single one of them. The Park Service, the biologists with their fancy degrees, the government suits in Washington. They've been lying to your face for a century. They look you in the eye and tell you that the Gigantopithecus died out 100,000 years ago. They tell you that we have mapped every square inch of our national parks, and that nothing larger than a black bear walks these woods. They call people like me crazy. They call us conspiracy theorists. But I need you to look at this photo. Don't just glance at it. Look at it. I took this picture in the summer of 1998 using a throwaway Kodak camera. The focus is a little soft, I know, but look at the anatomy. Look at the muscle structure on those shoulders. That isn't a man in a costume. A man in a suit doesn't move like that. A man doesn't have arms that hang down past his knees. And those two smaller figures sitting on the log next to him, those aren't bear cubs. Bears don't sit upright like curious children. Bears don't hold hands. Those were my boys. Silas and Barnaby. My name is Arthur. For 40 years, I wore the badge and the green uniform of a park ranger. I swore an oath to protect the land, but I broke that oath. I didn't just see a Bigfoot. I didn't just find a footprint in the mud and wonder what if. I raised two of them. I fed them. I sheltered them. And I taught them to hide from you. For 30 years, I was their father. And the reason you don't see them anymore, the reason the woods are getting quieter every single year, isn't because they are myths. It's because of us. We are the virus. This is my confession, and it's the only truth you're ever going to hear. I don't have much time left to tell this story. My lungs are shot. 30 years of damp mountain air and cheap tobacco finally caught up with me. But that's not what I'm worried about tonight. For the last 3 days, there's been a black SUV idling down on the fire road, just at the edge of my property line. Tinted windows, government plates. They haven't come up the driveway yet, but I know they're watching. They know that I know, and they're waiting for me to slip up. But before they kick down my door or accidentally run me off the road, I need the world to understand what actually happened out there. I need to get this weight off my soul before I meet my maker. This isn't some campfire horror story about monsters ripping apart campers in sleeping bags. If you're looking for a scare, go watch a movie. This is a story about family. It's about love. And it's about the single greatest mistake I ever made. The mistake of thinking a human being could save something so wild, so ancient, from the toxicity of our modern world. I've kept this secret locked in my chest since the Clinton administration. I lost my wife because of it. I lost my friends. I lost my sanity. But I gained something that no other human being has ever experienced. I looked into the eyes of a species that shouldn't exist, and I saw a soul looking back at me. It all started on a rainy Tuesday in October of 1994, the day the world as I knew it ended, and my true mission began, the day I found them in the mud. If you look at the official park logs for October 14, 1994, you'll see a simple entry next to my badge number, Patrol Sector 4, cleared debris. Nothing to report. That is the biggest lie I ever wrote. To understand why I did what I did, you have to understand the sheer violence of the weather that week. We called it Storm Elsie. It wasn't just a rainstorm. It was an atmospheric river that parked itself over the Cascades and just dumped water for 72 hours straight. The creeks turned into rapids. The trails turned into soup. And the mountains, well, the mountains started to move. I was the sector chief back then. I was younger, stronger, and I took my job deadly seriously. While the smart rangers were back at the station drinking coffee and waiting for the skies to clear, I was out in my '89 Ford F-150, grinding gears up the North Service Road. I was heading into Sector 4. The locals and the old-timers called that area the Devil's Finger. It's a narrow, jagged strip of wilderness that juts out into the high alpine zone. It's dense, it's steep, and the shadows there always seem a little darker than anywhere else in the park. No tourists go there. There aren't even any marked trails. It's just raw, untouched backcountry. The rain had finally slowed to a freezing, spitting mist, but the air was heavy. It felt electrically charged. You know that feeling when you walk into a room where two people have just stopped arguing? That tension? That's what the woods felt like. The silence was absolute. No birds. No wind in the canopy. Just the squelch of my tires fighting the mud and the hum of the engine. I came around a sharp switchback near the 3,000-foot elevation marker and hit the brakes. The road was gone. A massive section of the ridge above had given way, sending tons of shale, mud, an ancient Douglas fir tree sliding down onto the track. It was a chaotic mess of brown and gray scars against the green forest. I put the truck in park, grabbed my heavy yellow rain slicker and stepped out. The mud instantly grabbed my boots, sucking me down a few inches. The smell hit me first. Usually, a landslide smells like wet earth and crushed pine needles, a clean, sharp scent. But this was different. It was thick, pungent. It smelled like a wet dog, but amplified 100 times. It was a musky, coppery stench that triggered something primal in the back of my lizard brain. The hair on the back of my neck stood up straight. My conscious mind said, dead elk, or bear den washout. But my gut was screaming at me to get back in the truck and turn around. I didn't listen. I grabbed my shovel from the truck bed, thinking I'd poke around and assess the stability of the slide before calling in the heavy equipment crew. I started climbing over the debris pile, slipping on wet rocks. About 50 yards up the slope, away from the road, I saw the source of the smell. At first, my brain couldn't process the geometry of what I was seeing. It looked like a mound of dark, wet shag carpet thrown over a pile of boulders. It was massive. The bulk of it suggested a large bull moose or maybe a prize-winning steer that had wandered off a ranch miles away. But the color was wrong. It was a deep, rich chocolate brown, almost black in the dim light. I moved closer, gripping the handle of the shovel like a weapon. The silence was deafening. I could hear my own heart thumping in my ears, a whoosh-whoosh sound that drowned out the dripping water. I got within 10 feet and stopped dead. The creature was lying face down, half buried in the clay. The sheer scale of it was terrifying. Even crumpled in death, the torso was as wide as a refrigerator. The back was covered in thick, matted fur that swirled in patterns to shed water. But it was the anatomy that shattered my reality. I've seen bears skinned. I've seen bears dead. A bear has short, powerful rear legs and a distinct slope to its spine. This thing had legs that were long, uncannily long, and incredibly muscular, ending in feet, not paws. Feet. They were enormous, easily 20 inches long, with thick, callous pads that looked like tire tread. And the toes. 5 distinct toes. I dropped the shovel. It clattered against a rock, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the quiet valley. I walked the last few steps in a trance. I needed to see. I needed to know. I reached out a trembling hand. My glove looked like a child's toy next to the creature's arm, and I touched the fur. It was coarse, oily, and still warm. The heat radiating off the body told me this had happened recently, maybe within the last hour. I moved down to the hand. The left arm was splayed out to the side. The palm was facing up. It was black, leathery, and deeply lined like a roadmap of a hard life. The thumb was opposed. It was a hand designed for gripping, for tool using, for holding. It was a hand just like mine, only 3 times the size and capable of crushing a bowling ball like a grape. My God, I whispered. The steam from my breath hung in the air. It's real. I had to see the face. I had to look it in the eye, even if it was dead. I moved to the head, which was partially tucked under the shoulder, as if bracing for impact. It took all my strength to leverage the shoulder up. The body must have weighed 600 pounds. Easy. I grunted, heaving against the dead weight, and the body rolled slightly. The face that was revealed wasn't the monster from the movies. It wasn't a snarling beast. It was human. Disturbingly, heartbreakingly human. The skin was dark charcoal. The nose was flat and broad, the brow ridge heavy and prominent, shading closed eyes. But the lips were thin, and the structure of the cheekbones showed a kind of dignity. It was a female. I could tell by the chest. She looked like a matriarch, an elder, and she had died protecting something. Her body was curled in a fetal position, her massive arms locked tight against her chest, creating a cage of bone and muscle. She had taken the full force of the landslide on her back to shield whatever she was holding. That's when the sound cut through the air. It was faint at first, muffled by the wall of fur, a high-pitched warbling sound. Woo, woo, woo! I froze. A survivor? I fell to my knees in the mud, adrenaline dumping into my system. Hey, I called out, my voice cracking. Is someone there? The sound came again, more urgent this time. A desperate, terrified whimper. I started digging frantically, pulling away the mud and rocks that had piled up against the mother's chest. I grabbed her rigid arm and pulled with everything I had. It wouldn't budge. Rigor mortis hadn't set in yet, but the muscle density was insane. "Come on," I yelled, planting my boot against her hip and pulling until my shoulders screamed. Slowly, agonizingly, her arm lifted a few inches. 2 pairs of eyes stared out at me from the darkness of her embrace. I gasped and scrambled back, falling on my ass in the slush. They were tiny. Well, tiny is relative. They were about the size of a 2-year-old human child, but covered in soft, downy fur that was lighter than the mother's, almost the color of dried pine needles. Twins. They were clinging to the mother's fur with a grip that turned their knuckles white. They were shivering violently, soaking wet and terrified. When the light hit them, they buried their faces in the dead mother's chest, trying to hide. One of them, the slightly larger one, turned his head and looked right at me. His eyes were huge, a startling amber color, and the pupils were blown wide with shock. He didn't growl, he didn't bare his teeth, he just looked at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated loss. He reached a small, hairy hand up and touched the mother's cold face, then looked back at me and let out a sound that shattered whatever professional distance I had left. "Ma." It wasn't animal noise. It was a question. He was asking me to fix her. I sat there in the mud, the rain starting to pick up again, washing the tears off my face that I hadn't even realized were falling. I was a ranger. I was supposed to follow protocol. Protocol said, secure the scene, call dispatch, wait for the biologists and the feds. But looking at those 2 orphans shivering against the cooling body of their mother, I knew exactly what the feds would do. I'd seen what they did to wolves that wandered out of bounds. I knew about the secret labs out in Nevada. If I picked up that radio, these 2 beautiful, innocent things would be specimens in a jar within a week. The radio on my belt crackled to life, making me jump. "Unit 4 Alpha, this is dispatch. We have reports of seismic activity in your sector. Copy?" I stared at the radio. Then I stared at the twins. The decision I made in the next 10 seconds would define the rest of my life. I was standing on a precipice. On one side, my career, my pension, and my duty to the law. On the other side, 2 helpless souls that the world wanted to destroy. I need you to be honest with me right now. No judgment. If you were standing in that mud, looking into those amber eyes, would you have the courage to break the law? Or would the fear of the government be too much? Scroll down and tell me right now. Comment, protect, if you would have taken them in, or report if you would have followed orders. I read every single comment because I need to know I'm not the only one who would have made this choice. And if you haven't subscribed yet, click that button. Because what I had to do next, getting 2 wild creatures past a federal blockade, was nearly impossible. The radio in my hand felt like a live grenade. Unit 4 Alpha, report status. We have 2 federal biological survey teams inbound to your coordinates. ETA 10 minutes. My blood turned to ice. Biological survey teams. In 30 years of service, I had never heard of a bio team deploying that fast during a storm. They weren't coming to survey the mudslide. They were coming for them. The sensors. They must have thermal satellites or ground sensors that picked up the heat signature of the mother before she died. They knew something big was out here. I looked down at the twins. They had stopped crying and were now just shivering violently, their small hands gripping my rain slicker like it was the only solid thing in the universe. If I handed them over, I'd be the hero. I'd be on the cover of National Geographic. But I looked at the mother's face again, the dignity in it, the way she had sacrificed herself. If I gave her babies to men in white coats to be poked, prodded, and vivisected, I would be no better than a poacher. I keyed the mic. My hand was shaking so bad I almost dropped it. Dispatch, this is 4 Alpha. I lied, my voice sounding raspier than usual. Negative on the coordinates. I'm washed out at the South Ridge. The road is gone. I'm turning around. There's nothing out here but mud and rocks. Over. There was a long pause. A pause that felt like a lifetime. Copy that, 4 Alpha, return to base. I clipped the radio back to my belt and looked at the mess in front of me. I had bought myself maybe an hour before they figured out I wasn't at the South Ridge. I couldn't leave the mother. If they found the body, they'd hunt the woods for the offspring. I had to hide a 600-pound giant in 10 minutes. I grabbed the shovel again. Digging a grave in that rocky slurry was impossible, so I did the only thing I could. I started pulling down more loose shale from the embankment. I worked like a madman, hyperventilating, sweat stinging my eyes. I rolled massive boulders over her body, covering the dark fur with gray stone and brown mud. I arranged deadfall branches and snapped pines over the mound to make it look natural, like just another pile of debris from the storm. "I'm sorry," I whispered to her as I covered her face with a final layer of moss. "I promise I'll keep them safe." Now came the hard part. I approached the twins. They hissed at me, a low, guttural sound when I reached for them. They were terrified. "It's okay," I cooed, keeping my voice low and steady. "I'm not gonna hurt you." I took off my heavy yellow slicker and threw it over them like a net. I scooped them up. They were heavy, dense muscle and bone, probably 40 pounds each already. They struggled for a second, wriggling inside the coat, but the warmth seemed to calm them. Or maybe they just sensed that I was their only chance. I ran back to the truck, sliding in the mud, clutching the bundle to my chest. I threw them onto the passenger seat and slammed the door. As I jammed the truck into reverse, I saw headlights cutting through the rain way down in the valley. The feds. I didn't turn on my headlights. I drove that mountain road in the dark, navigating by memory and the flash of lightning. I took the old logging trail that cut through the dense timber, a trail that wasn't on the official maps anymore. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought I was having a heart attack. Every shadow looked like a soldier. Every branch hitting the windshield sounded like a drone. I wasn't heading back to the ranger station. I was heading to my private cabin, an old fire lookout tower I had converted into a home, 5 miles deep in the restricted zone. I had just kidnapped 2 Sasquatches. I was a felon, I was a fugitive, and I had no idea what the hell I was doing. You think raising human kids is hard? Try raising 2 wild primates that grow faster than bamboo and have the strength of a chimpanzee by the time they're 6 months old. The first week was a nightmare. I barely slept. I kept the curtains drawn and the lights off, terrified that a helicopter would spot movement through the window. They wouldn't eat. For 3 days they just huddled in the corner behind my wood stove, holding each other, letting out those heartbreaking little whimpers. They were grieving. That's when I learned the first truth about them. They feel emotion just as deeply as we do, maybe deeper. I tried everything. Cow's milk, dog food, raw steak. Nothing. They were starving themselves to death. On the 4th night, out of desperation, I remembered something I'd seen bears eating in the high country. I went out back and dug up some cattail roots and mashed them together with wild berries and a bit of honey. I put the bowl on the floor and backed away. The smaller one, the runt, sniffed the air. He uncurled himself, crept forward, dipped a long finger into the bowl and licked it. His eyes widened. He grunted at his brother, and suddenly they were both devouring it, making happy smacking noises. That was the night I named them. The bigger one, who was always positioning himself between me and his brother, I named Silas. He was the protector, serious, watchful, suspicious. The smaller one, the one who broke the fast, I named Barnaby. He was the curious one, the troublemaker, the one who would eventually steal my radio and take it apart just to see how it worked. But feeding them was the easy part. Hiding them was the war. By the time they were 1 year old, they were already 4 feet tall. They were covered in thick, shaggy fur that shed everywhere. My cabin smelled like a zoo. I stopped inviting people over. My wife, Sarah, she didn't understand. I couldn't tell her. How do you tell your wife you have 2 monsters in the basement? I started spending all my time at the cabin. I became the hermit ranger. People at the station whispered that I was losing it, that the job had gotten to me. Good. Let them think I'm crazy. Crazy people are left alone. But the woods have eyes. One afternoon in 1996, a group of hikers wandered way off trail. I was chopping wood out back, and Silas and Barnaby were playing in the tall grass near the tree line. They were wrestling, making those loud whooping noises. I heard a twig snap. I turned and saw a hiker, a guy in bright orange gear, standing maybe 50 yards away, staring right at the tree line. He had a camera around his neck. My stomach dropped. Silas was standing on his hind legs, plain as day. "Hey!" I yelled, charging toward the hiker, waving my axe like a lunatic. "This is a restricted area. Get out!" The hiker jumped, startled by the crazy old man with the axe. He looked at me, then looked back at the woods. I thought I saw a bear," he stammered. "A standing bear. Black bears stand up all the time." I barked, getting right in his face. "Now turn around and march, before I write you a federal ticket that'll bankrupt you." He ran, but I saw the look in his eyes. He wasn't sure what he saw, but he knew it wasn't right. That night I realized I couldn't keep them in the yard anymore. They were getting too big, too human-like. I had to teach them the most important lesson of their lives. I had to teach them to fear. I sat them down by the fire. They were sitting cross-legged, mimicking how I sat. I looked into their intelligent amber eyes and said, "Men are bad. Men will kill you. If you see a human, you run. You hide. You never ever let them see you." Barnaby looked at me confused. He pointed a finger at my chest. "Man?" "Yes," I said, tears stinging my eyes. "Even me. I am the danger." They didn't understand then, but they would. Oh God, they would. They say secrets are like cancer. They don't kill you all at once, they eat you from the inside out, cell by cell, until there's nothing left of the man you used to be. By 1999, Silas and Barnaby were 5 years old. In human years, that's kindergarten. In Sasquatch years, that's a linebacker for the NFL. They were nearly 7 feet tall, covered in dense muscle, and they ate 40 pounds of protein a day. I was spending my entire paycheck on meat. I was buying half cows from local farmers, telling them I was raising huskies for a sled team. I was stealing roadkill off the highway at 3 a.m. I was exhausted, I was paranoid, and I was absent. My wife, Sarah, she was a saint. She put up with the late nights. She put up with the mud tracked into the hallway, but she couldn't put up with the silence. She knew something was wrong. She could smell it on me. That musk, that wild, earthy scent of the boys. It sticks to your skin like smoke. No amount of soap washes it off. She'd hug me when I came home after 3 days at the watchtower, and she'd pull away, wrinkling her nose. "You smell like the woods, Artie," she'd say, her voice trembling. "But not the woods I know. You smell like wild animal." The breaking point came on Christmas Eve, 99. I was supposed to be at her parents' house for dinner, but a blizzard had rolled in, and I knew the boys would be terrified. The wind howls differently up in the peaks. It sounds like screaming. I couldn't leave them alone in that cabin. They might panic, break the door down, and run into the storm. So I didn't go home. I stayed in the cabin, huddled under blankets with 2 7-foot monsters, reading to them from an old encyclopedia, while the wind battered the walls. When I finally drove back down the mountain the next morning, the house was dark. Sarah was sitting at the kitchen table. Her suitcases were packed by the door. She didn't yell. She didn't throw plates. She just looked at me with eyes so full of disappointment that it hurt worse than a bullet. "Is it another woman, Arthur?" she asked softly. I almost laughed. "No," I said. "God, no. Sarah, it's complicated. It's work. It's classified. It's always classified," she whispered. She stood up and picked up her keys. "I can't do this anymore. I can't be married to a ghost. You're physically here, but your soul is up on that mountain. Whatever is up there, you love it more than you love me." I wanted to scream the truth. I wanted to grab her hand, drive her up the fire road, and introduce her to Silas and Barnaby. I wanted to show her the miracle, but I couldn't. Sarah was a talker. She had a big heart, but she couldn't keep a secret. If I told her, she'd tell her sister, who would tell the town, and within 24 hours, the military would be swarming my land. Silas and Barnaby would be dead. So I stood there in the hallway, covered in snow and Sasquatch hair, and I let the love of my life walk out the door. I watched her taillights fade down the driveway. I poured myself a drink, and then I got back in my truck and drove back to the cabin. That was the day Arthur the man died, and Arthur the keeper was born. I moved into the cabin permanently. I cut the phone lines. I stopped going into town except for supplies. I became the crazy ranger on the mountain, the weirdo, the recluse. It was lonely. God, it was lonely. There were nights I sat on the porch with my shotgun, staring at the moon, wondering if I had lost my mind. But then, out of the dark, a massive furry hand would rest on my shoulder. Silas. He didn't speak English, but he knew. He could smell the sadness on me. He'd sit next to me, imitating my posture, and let out a low, rumbling purr in his chest, a sound of pure comfort. I lost my wife, but I realized then that I hadn't lost my family. I had just traded a human one for something different, something older. But as they grew, the danger grew too. They were getting curious. They were starting to test the boundaries, and the world outside was getting smaller. GPS, drones, trail cams. Technology was catching up to us. I knew it was only a matter of time before our luck ran out. I gave up everything for them. My marriage, my reputation, my sanity. Most people would say I'm crazy. Most people would say no animal is worth ruining your life over. But you haven't seen what I've seen. You haven't seen what happens when a Sasquatch decides to trust you with its life. In the next chapter, I'm going to tell you about the miracle. The moment I realized they weren't just smart animals but something far more human than we are. And I'm going to tell you about the day they saved me. If you want to see how this story ends, and find out the tragic reason why you never see them anymore, hit that subscribe button right now. You do not want to miss the climax of this confession. Time in the woods moves differently. You measure it in winters survived, in gray hairs, and in the rings of the trees. By 2005, Silas and Barnaby were fully grown. I want you to try and visualize what that actually means. You think you know what big is. You've seen NBA players. You've seen wrestlers. But you haven't seen a male Sasquatch in his prime. Silas stood 8 feet, 7 inches tall. He weighed close to 900 pounds. His chest was a barrel of bone and muscle so dense that I honestly don't think a small caliber bullet would have even penetrated it. When he walked, you didn't just hear it, you felt it in the soles of your feet. Thump, 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 like the heartbeat of the mountain itself. But the miracle wasn't their size. It was their minds. I spent years trying to teach them English. They couldn't form the words. Their vocal cords are shaped differently, deeper, designed for long-range projection across valleys. But they understood everything. They developed their own language. It was a mix of complex hand signals. Some they made up, some they learned from watching me, and a series of clicks, whistles, and low-frequency hums. They even gave me a name. They called me Click Who. It was the sound of my knee popping, which it did every time I stood up, followed by the wheeze of my breath. To them, I was the broken one, the frail father. They knew I was weak, and that realization saved my life. It was a Tuesday in late summer. I was hiking the perimeter fence about 2 miles from the cabin. I was getting careless in my old age. I wasn't carrying my rifle, just a hiking stick and a sidearm I prayed I'd never have to use. I came around a blind corner in a berry patch and walked straight into a nightmare. A grizzly sow, a big one. She had 2 cubs with her. In the wild, this is a death sentence. I froze. She stood up on her hind legs, towering over me, snapping her jaws. The smell of rotten meat and aggression rolled off her. I went for my pistol, but I was too slow. My thumb fumbled the safety. She charged. It happened so fast. 1 second she was 10 feet away. The next, she was on top of me. The force of the impact felt like being hit by a Honda Civic. I flew backward, hitting a pine tree hard enough to crack a rib. My gun flew into the brush. As I looked up, dazed and gasping for air, the sow was looming over me, her claws raised to strip the face off my skull. I closed my eyes. I waited for the darkness. Roar! The sound wasn't a bear roar. It was a sound that vibrated your teeth. It was a scream of pure primal rage that silenced the entire forest. I opened my eyes just in time to see a blur of dark fur explode from the tree line. Silas. He didn't tackle the bear. He didn't bite her. He simply collided with her. Imagine a freight train hitting a minivan. Silas slammed his shoulder into the 600-pound grizzly and sent her flying 5 yards through the air. She tumbled, confused, roaring in pain. But she was a mother protecting her cubs, so she didn't back down. She scrambled up and lunged at him, swiping her 4-inch claws across his chest. Silas didn't even flinch. He caught her paw mid-air. He caught it like you'd catch a child's hand. He roared in her face, a deafening, guttural blast, and then shoved her backward with such force that she lost her footing and rolled down the embankment. He stood there, chest heaving, teeth bared, arms spread wide, creating a wall between the predator and me. He was the apex. He was the king of the woods. The bear looked at him. She looked at her cubs. She did the math. She chuffed at her babies, turned tail, and ran. I was lying in the dirt, clutching my ribs, unable to breathe. The rage vanished from Silas's face instantly. He turned to me. His eyes, those intelligent amber eyes, were filled with panic. He dropped to all fours and crawled over to me, making soft, cooing noises. Then, Barnaby appeared from the brush. He must have been flanking us. What happened next is the part that still makes me cry when I drink too much whiskey. Barnaby saw the blood on my arm where I'd scraped it against the tree. He didn't recoil. He reached out, grabbed a handful of sphagnum moss, which contains natural iodine. chewed it for a second to soften it, and then gently pressed it against my wound. He was doctoring me. Silas scooped me up in his arms. I'm a grown man, 200 pounds. He carried me back to the cabin like I was a rag doll. He cradled my head so it wouldn't bounce. That night, as I lay by the fire nursing my broken rib, they sat on the floor next to me, refusing to sleep. They took turns patting my leg, checking if I was still warm. That was the moment. That was the shift. I wasn't their keeper anymore. I wasn't the ranger. I was the pet. I was the fragile thing they loved. And that terrified me more than the bear, because I knew that if the government ever came for them, they wouldn't run. They would stay and fight to protect me. And against bullets, even a Sasquatch doesn't stand a chance. I always thought it would end with gunfire. I thought I'd go out in a blaze of glory, standing on my porch with a Winchester, holding off the army while my boys escaped into the deep timber. I was wrong. The end didn't come with a bang. It came with a cough. About 6 months ago, things started to change. It was a mild winter, wet and foggy. I noticed Barnaby was sleeping more than usual. He stopped playing with the puzzle blocks I made him. He stopped stripping the bark off the firewood. He just lay there by the stove, his eyes dull and glassy. Then came the hacking. It sounded like rocks rattling in a tin can. Deep, fluid-filled coughs that shook his entire massive frame. Then Silas started. I panicked. I drove into town and bought every antibiotic I could find at the farm supply store. Penicillin, tetracycline, stuff meant for horses and cattle. I ground the pills into their venison stew. I prayed, but they didn't get better, they got worse. Patches of their beautiful thick fur started to fall out in clumps, revealing gray, irritated skin underneath. They lost weight terrifyingly fast. You haven't seen sadness until you've seen an 8-foot giant look at you with confusion, wondering why his strength is leaving him. I took a blood sample from Barnaby. He didn't even flinch when I stuck him with the needle. And I did something risky. I sent it to a private vet lab under a fake name, claiming it was from a hybrid exotic mastiff. The results came back 3 days later. The vet called me personally. He sounded spooked. "Mr. Smith," he said, "I don't know what animal this is, but its immune system is collapsing. It looks like a severe reaction to, well, to human pathogens. Common flu, Epstein-Barr, stuff we carry every day and don't even notice. To this animal, it's poison. It's like their biology is incompatible with the modern world." I dropped the phone. It wasn't the government. It wasn't the pollution. It was me. My breath, my clothes, my very presence. I was the typhoid Mary of the Sasquatch. By loving them, by keeping them close, I had been slowly poisoning them for 30 years. Their isolation had protected them for a while, but eventually the human world leaked in. I sat on the floor between them, weeping, holding their feverish hands. They were burning up. Their body temperature was spiking to 106 degrees, and that heat was our death sentence. 2 nights later, the dog started barking. Not my dog. I didn't have one anymore. But the neighbor's dog, 3 miles down the valley. Then silence. Then the sound. Thwap, thwap, thwap. It wasn't a news chopper. It was the low, rhythmic beat of a military surveillance drone. A reaper or a predator flying low-pattern grids over the national park. I realized with horror what was happening. The boys were running fevers of 106 degrees. In the freezing cold mountain air, they were lighting up like Christmas trees on thermal imaging sensors. We were glowing beacons in the dark. I ran to the window. Through the trees, I saw it. A red strobe light blinking in the sky, circling directly above my cabin. They had found us. Silas tried to stand up. He sensed the danger. He let out a low growl, but it turned into a coughing fit that brought him to his knees. He looked at me, and for the first time in his life I saw fear. Not for him, for me. He knew the sky eyes meant bad men were coming. I grabbed my shotgun. I grabbed the keys to the truck. But looking at them, too weak to walk, let alone run, I knew we weren't making it to the truck. The radio on my shelf, the one I hadn't turned on in years, suddenly crackled to life on the emergency band. "Attention occupant of the structure at Grid 4 Zulu. This is federal authority. You are harboring a biological hazard. Remain indoors. Do not attempt to leave. Containment teams are inbound. ETA, 2 minutes. 2 minutes. I looked at my boys. My dying, beautiful boys. I looked at the rifle, and I realized there was only one way to save them from the cages. Only one way to make sure they never ended up on a dissection table. I had to make the hardest decision a father can ever make. I didn't shoot them. I couldn't. But I knew I couldn't let the government take them either. If they found them alive, it was a cage. If they found them dead, it was a slab. There was one secret about the cabin I had never told a soul. Not even Sarah. Under the rug in the pantry, there was a hatch. It led to an old bootlegger's tunnel from the 1920s. A narrow, damp chute that cut through the bedrock and opened up into an abandoned silver mine deep inside the mountain. 2 minutes, the voice on the radio had said. I grabbed Silas. He was barely conscious, his breathing shallow and rattling wetly in his massive chest. I practically dragged him to the hatch. He seemed to understand. He didn't fight. He moved with the last ounce of strength he had, sliding his massive bulk into the darkness of the earth. Barnaby followed, whimpering, clutching my shirt. We crawled. For 300 yards, we crawled through the mud and the dark, while above us, I could hear the thump, thump, thump of boots hitting my porch. I heard the front door shatter. I heard them shouting my name. But we were gone. We were deep in the veins of the mountain. We reached the main chamber of the old silver mine. It was cold, silent, safe from the thermal cameras, safe from the men in suits. But we weren't safe from the fever. I sat there in the dark, my flashlight beam dying, holding the hands of the two beings I loved most in this world. Barnaby went first. He looked at me, his eyes clearing for just a second. He let out a soft sigh, squeezed my hand with his leather palm, and then he was just gone. The light went out of him. Silas lasted another hour. He fought it. He wanted to stay with me, but the fluid in his lungs was too much. He rested his heavy head on my lap, let out that low, rumbling purr one last time, and stopped breathing. I sat in that cave for 2 days. I didn't eat. I didn't sleep. I just held them. My boys. My kings. When I finally stood up, I knew what I had to do. I couldn't bury them. The ground was solid rock, and I couldn't leave them exposed. I found the support beams for the mine shaft entrance, old, rotting timber holding up tons of granite. I kissed them both on the forehead. I told them I was sorry. I told them that they were the best part of my life. Then I walked to the entrance, tied a rope around the main support beam, and pulled with everything I had left. The mountain groaned. The rocks screamed, and then the ceiling came down. Thousands of tons of rock and earth collapsed, sealing the chamber forever. It wasn't a grave. It was a vault, a pyramid for the kings of the forest. No government drill, no ground-penetrating radar will ever find them. They returned to the stone from which they came. I crawled out through a ventilation shaft 3 miles away, dirty, broken, and alone. When I got back to the cabin, the feds were gone. They had ransacked the place, found the hair samples, found the large beds. They knew what I had done, but they didn't have the bodies. Without the bodies, they couldn't prove anything. But they've been watching me ever since, waiting for me to lead them back to the site. That was 6 months ago. And now, looking at the security monitor on my desk, I see the men in black suits walking up my driveway. They aren't waiting anymore. They're coming in. I'm going to leave this tape in the Dropbox we agreed on. If you are watching this, it means I'm gone, dead, or in a hole somewhere that doesn't exist on any map. But I need you to hear the message. I need you to understand why they are extinct. It's not because they are weak. It's because we are toxic. Our noise, our chemicals, our diseases, our need to control everything. We are the invasive species. Silas and Barnaby were the last of their clan in this sector, maybe the last in the world. And I killed them with my love. I killed them by trying to make them part of my world. If you ever see something in the woods, if you ever see a shadow that moves too fast, or find a footprint that looks too human, do not follow it. Do not take a picture. Do not try to save it. Turn around, walk away, and let them be. Preserve the mystery, because once we touch it, we destroy it. Goodbye.